Three Iranian nuclear sites, Fordow, Isfahan, and Natanz, have just been obliterated. Operation Midnight Hammer, which saw the US work alongside Israel to decimate the trio of sites using B-2 Spirit bombers, is complete. Now we await the aftermath. In this video, we'll explore what happened, the impact of the operation on Iran's nuclear capabilities, and what comes next. We'll start with the basics. Operation Midnight Hammer saw the United States deploy several of its B-2 Spirit stealth bombers to 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. There, the bombers dropped a combined total of 14 30,000-pound GBU-57B massive ordnance penetrator, or MOP, bombs, each of which is capable of penetrating 200 feet underground before unleashing their explosive payloads. Several were dropped in each of the 3 locations, suggesting a strategy where one bomb would follow another, with each bomb following being able to penetrate deeper than the one that came before it. It wasn't just the B-2s that were involved. According to the Warzone, or TWZ, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has confirmed that a total of 125 aircraft were involved in Operation Midnight Hammer, most of which supported the B-2s as they completed their portion of the operation. At least some of these aircraft were aerial tankers used to refuel the B-2s. Other aircraft may have been in play to handle Iran's already damaged air defenses, ensuring the B-2s had safe passage to their targets. Operation Midnight Hammer also didn't just include aircraft. TWZ confirms that Iran's Isfahan nuclear site was struck with more than 24 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, which were launched from a submarine in an undisclosed location close to Iran. The US Navy only has 4 of the Ohio-class submarines capable of launching this many of the Tomahawk cruise missiles at once, suggesting one of those subs was operating in the waters around Iran. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the US Air Force, General Dan Raisin Kane, provided more details. According to TWZ, he said that the US mission was designed to severely degrade Iran's nuclear weapon infrastructure, and it was planned and executed across multiple domains and theaters with coordination that reflects our ability to project power globally with speed and precision at the time and place of our nation's choosing. Kane added, "At midnight Friday into Saturday morning, a large B-2 strike package comprised of bombers left the US. Part of that package served as a decoy heading west into the Pacific region, with the rest moving on to Iran. The main strike package heading to Iran," says TWZ, "included 7 B-2 bombers, each with 2 crew members and likely loaded with a pair of GBU-57B weapons that struck the Iranian facilities. Those aircraft proceeded quietly to the east with minimal communications throughout the 18-hour flight into the target area, confirming that each aircraft also completed several in-flight refuelings each." We know that the US used decoys. That's where many of the 125 aircraft come into play. The US employed several deception tactics, including decoys, as the 4th and 5th generation aircraft pushed out in front of the strike package at high altitude and high speed, sweeping in front of the package for enemy fighters and surface-to-air missile threats, Kane told reporters. Some of those decoys then switched to using suppression tactics against Iran's air defenses, clearing the way for the B-2s to arrive and drop their devastating payloads. "We are currently unaware of any shots fired at the US strike package," Kane confirmed, showing us that a combination of clever US planning and Israel's past exploits during Operation Rising Lion have rendered Iran's most vital air defenses practically useless. We also know that the first B-2 strike occurred at 2:10 a.m. Iranian local time on June 21st, when the lead B-2 dropped a pair of GBU-57 weapons on Fordow. The rest of the B-2s followed up, again hitting Fordow along with striking the Natanz nuclear facility. At this point, it appears that Isfahan was only hit with the previously mentioned Tomahawk cruise missiles, as Kane confirms that the 14 GBU-57s were dropped against 2 nuclear target areas. This is huge. The US has just unleashed a highly coordinated strike against Iran's 3 key nuclear facilities, and it's done plenty of damage. We don't know exactly how much, yet. Kane was quick to point out that the US needs some time to fully assess the extent of the damage caused by the US bunker-busting bombs, says the BBC. However, satellite imagery shared by multiple outlets, including the BBC and TWZ, indicates that the US hit Iran's nuclear facilities hard. At Fordow, these images show what appear to be 6 fresh craters, which likely served as the entry points for the GBU-57s. Grey dust and debris are also scattered around the mountainside, which could be the aftermath of the B-2's supporting aircraft, launching missiles against Iran's air defenses. "This is what you should expect to see," Stu Ray of Mackenzie Intelligence Services tells the BBC. "You will not see a huge blast effect at the entry point, as it," referring to the GBU-57, "is not designed to detonate on entry, but deeper down into the facility. Ray also points out that the grey coloration seen in the Fordow images appears to indicate that the GBU-57s were successful in blowing through the concrete armor used to protect the underground facility. Tunnel entrances also appear to have been blocked off at Fordow, though there are no visible impact points near those tunnels. Ray speculates that Iran may have preemptively blocked those tunnel entrances to prevent other US munitions from entering. TWZ provides similar satellite images from Fordow, courtesy of Maxar Technologies. These images seem to confirm what the BBC reported. Again, we see plenty of dust, along with visible holes and craters where the GBU-57s appear to have penetrated through the ground and into the facilities. The Open Source Center also shared an interesting topographical analysis on X. Thanks to its analysis, we can see that the US seemingly targeted Fordow's main Cascade Hall, which is at the rear of the facility, far back from the two tunnels leading into Fordow. More images have also arrived showcasing the damage to Iran's Isfahan facility. Again shared by TWZ and provided by Maxar, we see extensive damage caused to the above-ground site by the US Tomahawk missiles, adding to damage already caused by Israel during Operation Rising Lion. CNN reports that at least 18 destroyed or partially destroyed structures can be seen in the images, with visible blackening and rubble strewn throughout the pictures confirming direct hits made by the Tomahawks. An analysis of the Isfahan site provided to CNN by the Institute for Science and International Security, or ISIS, President David Albright also suggests that the US targeted tunnel complexes near Isfahan where Iranians typically store enriched uranium. This suggests the US specifically targeted storage facilities holding uranium enriched to between 20 and 60%. Uranium enriched to this level isn't enough to create a nuclear warhead. Iran would need uranium enriched to 90% for that. However, it's enough to create a dirty bomb capable of unleashing massive amounts of radiation across a large area, were Iran to consider that tactic. ISIS also says that the US strike on Isfahan seems to have targeted the facility's main uranium conversion building, which are home to the gas centrifuges Iran uses to enrich uranium. The satellite images seem to show that these buildings were severely damaged, ISIS tells CNN. Tunnel entrances leading into Isfahan also sustained damage, though it also seems that Iran backfilled these tunnels with soil as a preventative measure similar to that seen at Fordow. Finally, there's Natanz. The site that was the key target of Israel's Operation Rising Lion was also hit hard during Operation Midnight Hammer. Israel had already succeeded in taking out key electrical infrastructure at Natanz, CNN reports, with that infrastructure going down also likely to have damaged the site's centrifuges. The US added to that damage. CNN confirms that the US dropped 2 of its massive bunker-busting bombs on Natanz, with the site also being hit by several of the 30 Tomahawk missiles that caused such massive damage at Isfahan. Satellite images of Natanz show a pair of new craters, likely the entry points of the US GBU-57s, which CNN says sit directly above parts of the Natanz complex known to be underground. Beyond that, we don't have too much more information about the damage caused at Natanz. It appears that the use of GBU-57s here may have been intended as a finishing blow to take out the site's underground facilities after Israel already devastated its above-ground facilities a little over a week ago. All signs point to Operation Midnight Hammer being a massive success from a military perspective. US President Donald Trump was quick to point this out in the aftermath of the operation. In an address delivered to the US, Trump confirmed some of the basic details. A short time ago, the US military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, Trump said. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Trump reported that the strikes were a spectacular military success and that Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. The US president also labeled Iran as the bully of the Middle East while pressing for the country to make peace in the wake of the US attacks. If they don't, Trump warned, then more will be coming. Future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier, Trump added. The US president also offered some of the key reasons why the US chose now to launch a strike against Iran. For 40 years, Iran has been saying, "Death to America, death to Israel." They've been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their speciality. Thousands of people have died as a result of these attacks, Trump claims, with this Iranian campaign seemingly adding to the destruction of the country's nuclear programs to make up for the core reasons for the strikes. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. As for the B-2s used in the Fordow and Natanz strikes, all appear to have returned safely. Kane confirmed the sheer scale of the operation, telling reporters per TWZ that More than 125 US aircraft participated in this mission, including B-2 stealth bombers, multiple flights of 4th and 5th generation fighters, dozens and dozens of air refueling tankers, a guided missile submarine, and a full array of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, as well as hundreds of maintenance and operational professionals, were all involved in Operation Midnight Hammer. Radio chatter captured by Spotter and Bill Bagley and shared to the TWZ YouTube channel also confirms that the deployed B-2s were flying over New Jersey en route to the Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. The Caucus Monitor Report X account also shared footage of the B-2s flying over New Jersey, again suggesting that the US suffered no loss of equipment during its daring strikes. The US has just pulled off a huge victory against Iran's nuclear program. It also worked alongside Israel to pull off Operation Midnight Hammer. However, as the US basks in the afterglow of a successful campaign, we're forced to consider two questions. What does this mean for the Iranian nuclear program, and what comes next? With the damage caused by Operation Midnight Hammer, we can likely assume that Iran's nuclear program has been stopped in its tracks. For how long is what remains unknown. In his analysis of the operation, military analyst Preston Stewart suggests that Operation Midnight Hammer may not spell the end of the Iranian nuclear weapons development program. He points out that the 3 sites the US targeted may not be the only nuclear facilities. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Iran has other facilities somewhere in the country where they have some centrifuges that could assist with the further enrichment of uranium. Perhaps the US believes this too. That would explain why it specifically targeted an enriched uranium storage facility at Isfahan. Uranium enriched to 60% can't be then sent to another facility that could bring it up to 90% if that uranium no longer exists. However, we don't know if the US targeted similar facilities at Natanz and Fordow, or whether those storage units even exist at these 2 sites. It's possible that Iran may have sent some of its uranium to other secret sites, as Stewart suggests, and could be working on further enrichment of the creation of a dirty bomb as we speak. More on that later. Stewart also points out the destruction of Iranian facilities doesn't necessarily spell the end for the country's nuclear ambitions. So destroying everything that Iran has on hand does not mean that they can't build it again in the future, can't import it from friendly nations again in the future, he says. Israel seems to be anticipating this. Operation Rising Lion specifically targeted some of the top minds in Iran's nuclear program. Sky News confirmed on June 16th that Israel's initial strikes took out some key Iranian personnel, including former head of Iran's atomic energy organization Feridun Abbasi Davani and nuclear scientist Mohammad Mehdi Terenci. Perhaps we're seeing the combined US and Israel strategy here. Taking out some of the key minds in Iran's nuclear program means it takes longer for Iran to recover. Iran will have plenty more scientists who understand how to enrich uranium and build nuclear bombs, but taking out key figureheads could lead to some of these scientists refusing to work on Iran's nuclear program. Regardless, with key figures taken out, the US then destroys the facilities Iran uses. Again, these facilities could be rebuilt, and as Stewart points out, Iran has more. But for now, it seems that Iran's nuclear program has been stopped in its tracks. Whether that means it's done forever remains to be seen. That brings us to the second question we posed: what comes next? Iran's response has been muddled, to say the least. Stewart points out in his analysis that Iran initially attempted to deny that Operation Midnight Hammer had even occurred, claiming that there were no explosions at its nuclear sites and everything the US claimed was just a bluff. We know that isn't true. The satellite images confirm that Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan were hit. Iran eventually shifted its rhetoric to provide official confirmations that these sites were indeed hit. Now Iran has changed from denying to vowing vengeance. Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has claimed that the US must receive a response for their aggression. Iran also launched a fresh series of missiles at Israel hours after Operation Midnight Hammer, which the BBC reports injured at least 86 people in Tel Aviv and Haifa. But what comes after that initial retaliation? Iran may still have the option of launching a dirty bomb against Israel, especially if Operation Midnight Hammer failed to take out all of the uranium it has enriched to 60%. Those bombs wouldn't hit home with the sheer force generated by a full nuclear weapon. However, they could spread radiation across a massive region, essentially poisoning large swathes of Israel's population. We also can't forget that Iran has about 20 US bases stationed in surrounding countries to choose from when it comes to direct missile attack against America, the BBC points out. Iran also has the option of launching what the BBC dubs swarm attacks of drones and torpedo boats against US ships operating in the Middle East. There's also the Strait of Hormuz to consider. Iran controls that strait, with Forbes reporting on June 22nd that the country's parliament has already approved a measure calling for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. From a military perspective, the closure of that strait doesn't achieve much. Forbes also points out that it's Iran's military, not its parliament, which will ultimately choose whether to blockade the strait. However, the objective here would be to create pressure on the West. Every day, around 30% of the world's traded oil, 20% of its liquid natural gas, and about a third of the world's liquefied petroleum shipments pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Forbes says that amounts to between 30 and 33 million barrels of oil equivalent per day, much of which heads to countries like the US from nations including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. The global oil market is already expected to react to this possibility, with oil prices likely to go up after already rising 20% over the past month. The Houthis may also become a factor once again. Based in Yemen, the Houthis are a militant group that was responsible for attacking commercial shipping vessels as a retaliation against Israel and its efforts to eliminate Hamas in Palestine. That group has close ties to Iran, often being referred to as an Iranian proxy. Crisis Group explains that the 2024 Houthi raids in the Red Sea affected about 12% of global maritime trade passing through the Suez Canal. In the space of a year, the Houthis conducted almost 500 raids against commercial shipping that caused traffic through the Suez Canal to drop by about 50%, as shipping companies chose the safer and longer route around the south of Africa. Those types of attacks may be about to start again. On June 22nd, the Times of Israel reported on comments made by Yemen's rebel government. "We affirm the Republic of Yemen's commitment to the Armed Forces declaration that they were ready to target US ships and warships in the Red Sea," said Yemen's unofficial government. Note the specific mention of US ships. If the Houthis follow through, that could bring the US back to Yemen to carry out more of the airstrikes it used between March and May of this year to decimate the Houthi command structure. How effective the group's strikes could be following what happened to it earlier in the year remains to be seen. However, there's also a far more worrying potential Iranian response to Operation Midnight Hammer to consider. Iran may be more determined now than ever to build a nuclear weapon. That's according to Julian E. Barnes, writing for the New York Times on June 22nd. He says that before Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran still hadn't decided on whether or not to build a nuclear weapon. Doing so was within its reach thanks to its enriched uranium stockpiles, but it hadn't taken the final step, and it didn't seem ready to do so amidst pressure from the US. Now that may be about to change. Barnes reports on comments made by the director of the Middle East program at Defense Priorities, Rosemary Kalanick, who says, "The sad truth is that by striking Iran, the US has made it much more likely that Iran will want to obtain nuclear weapons. Even if the raids knocked out all of Iran's nuclear capabilities, a big if, Iran will now be more motivated than ever to rebuild their capacities and pursue not just uranium enrichment but actual weaponization. How long this would take remains to be seen. Iran needs to assess the damage done by Operation Midnight Hammer. Still, what the US may have hoped would be a one-and-done attack may evolve into something much more. Iran may continue pushing for nuclear warheads. Its proxies, especially the Houthis in Yemen, could reactivate. Despite the success of Operation Midnight Hammer, the US may have just drawn itself into a wider Middle East conflict that will lead to more death and devastation. US military bases in the Middle East may soon be targeted. Iran may also spearhead the use of terrorist attacks inside the US itself. The aftermath remains to be seen. But for now, the US seems satisfied with Operation Midnight Hammer, and it may be that Iran is too focused on Israel to launch a proper response to the US. Check out our video that offers an in-depth analysis of the military showdown emerging between these two countries, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show if you want more videos covering the emerging Middle East crisis.